Good day, B3 students, and welcome back to the Epic B3 Students podcast. I am your host, Luke Dickerson, also known as Mr. Announcement Man, here with our special guest, never before seen on this channel, Pastor Andrew Clark. He is the student pastor at what?
Never before seen on this channel. That could be a lie.
True, but I've never seen you before on this channel. We gotta redo this intro. Good day, B3 students, and welcome back to the Epic B3 Students podcast. I am your host, Luke Dickerson, Mr. Announcement Man, here to bring you episode 14 of the B3 Students Epic podcast, Epic B3 Students podcast, here with special guest, Pastor Andrew. And he is going to be answering my questions today, not vice versa. And our questions will be based on chapters 1 through 3 of Revelation, last book of the Bible, where we've been studying in Generate. And if you haven't been with us on Generate, then go and watch the videos. They're on this channel. So go find them. Generate. They're called Endgame.
Which, by the way,
Jesus, the Ultimate Avenger.
With you asking me questions, Luke, these questions are that's terrifying. I just want to point that out because you are a deep thinker, and I feel like these questions are going to reflect the deep thinkingness of your thinkingness.
The deep. Well, I will try to think deeply, but also not too deep as to be pointless.
Fair enough.
Okay. First question. In Revelation chapter 2 and 3, each of the letters begins with the saying, "Write to the angel of the church in this place," Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, all the other places. So what does it mean for a church to have an angel, and are these angels responsible for the problems that each church faces?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to unfold within that question, so I'll try to be as brief as I can. I think the first thing that we have to understand is that the reference to angels and the churches is also, if you go back to Revelation chapter 1, it talks about that as well. I think Jesus makes a reference somewhere in chapter 1 about the lampstands and the angels. I think it's at the end of chapter 1. If I'm not mistaken, should be in there somewhere. So we see this terminology come up a lot. Well, there's really 5, and I read it this way in one commentary, that there's 5 different explanations to this. The first one is people think that it's heavenly guardians of the church. So not quite like Guardians of the Galaxy, but like guardians of the church in a sense of like it's a set angel for that particular church. So that's kind of number one. The other people kind of say, well, it's not necessarily angels as in what we think of angels being from heaven and guarding and protecting over the church, but it's more of humans who are protecting the church. So these are your pastors or your overseers, or for some churches, they call them bishops, things like that, your church leaders, whoever is responsible for the preaching and the teaching of that church, then that's who that overseer is. Another one is that they're basically personifications of the church themselves. Another interpretation says that it's literally human messengers who were literally sent to those specific churches to deliver the message. So once John wrote the letter, those were the people that then would deliver the letter to the churches. And then one is basically that it's somebody that just tells them about this specific message. So there's 5 different things that we could go into there. I'm going to give y'all the one that I think is the most confident, at least what I think, and most other scholars think that the answer would be. I think that I fall into the lines of this, that when it talks about angels, it's talking about the pastors and leaders of the church. And the reason why I say that is because it's the pastors and the teachers of the church, the elders, or the teaching elder, the main teaching pastor, whoever's standing up and preaching the word, they're the ones that are going to be telling the people this message. Remember, Revelation is a letter or a message from Jesus, particularly in chapters 3 and what we covered this past week, chapters 2 and 3. the letters to the churches, right? So it was direct messages delivered to these churches from Jesus. Like, how terrifying is that? Which we talked about that. Jesus rebuked them. Good job, church. Bad job, church. And then here's what you need to do, church, kind of situation. So I think that the messengers are the pastors, because the pastors in themselves are messengers, because they are delivering people the message of God. Their pastors are considered biblically the shepherds over the flock. And there are a couple verses that I have here that would relate to that is Hebrews 13:17 that says, obey your leaders, submit to them, since they'll keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account, so that they can do this with joy and not with grief, and that will be unprofitable to you. And another one is James 3:1, not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, because you know that they will receive stricter judgment. So the weightiness of what it means to be a messenger and a pastor is because pastors are responsible for the care and the souls of the people in which they are shepherd over. There is this judgment that's there. So that kind of goes into the second part of your question. Are they responsible for the affliction that's taking place? Well, if a church is like some of the churches that we talked about this past week, when we see in Jesus's rebuke to the churches, some of them were compromising their faith in certain areas. They were starting to compromise beliefs into certain things that contradicted Scripture. Well, I would say that if a church is compromising those things, and that means that the pastor or leader of that church is leading them in that direction, so they could very well be responsible for some of those things. So I think that's probably the best way to look at it in as a holistic view. But like I said, many different interpretations of that. It wouldn't be the book of Revelation if there wasn't 20 or 30 different interpretations. So that's kind of where I go. But I don't know if that answers your question or not. You tell me, Mr. Announcement Man.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I didn't realize there were so many ways to look at it. But if it is the case that the pastors are what he's referring to when he says pray to the angels, then I think it only makes sense that the pastors are responsible for whatever's going on in the church. The sexual immorality that was prominent in Pergamum, or the idolatry in the other churches and stuff like that. Like if it were actual like angels guarding over the churches, then I think it'd be a little bit more debatable whether or not they were responsible. But if it's the pastors, definitely. Okay. Second question. In Revelation chapter 3, verse 10, Jesus says, because you have kept my command to endure, I will also keep you from the hour of testing that is going to come over the whole world to test those who live on earth. This is in the letter to Philadelphia. So what does that mean? Like, is God protecting only this church from like stuff that's going to happen before the coming of Christ, like what all the awful things that we will learn about later in the reading? Or is he just saying, hey, you guys have endured trials and stuck by me, and that's why you will be raptured and you will not have to endure the tribulation?
Well, one resource that I was looking at for this, it talks about this particular verse, that hour of testing, referring to the outpouring of God's wrath on the world that we're going to see, as you just mentioned, later on, and starts in Revelation 6:1, and that believers will be spiritually protected from these attacks and plagues that we're going to see in like Revelation 9:4, Revelation 11:1, and others, and that they'll persevere and obtain eternal life and all that kind of thing. That's one area, put it that way. Another area looked at it as, the Great Tribulation. I think most people look at this as the Great Tribulation. I think this is the tribulation period that's going to be taking place here. But how you interpret this verse, Luke, depends on whether or not you believe the church is going to, when the church is raptured. So what we mean by raptured is that's when Christ comes, and then the people of God are then taken up into heaven, and pulled out of this world, and then everyone else is here left to go through the tribulation and the judgment. So the question then, Luke, first, before I answer that, comes back to whether or not you believe in what we call pre-tribulation or post-tribulation. What are your thoughts there? I'm going to turn it back on you.
So you mean whether or not I believe it will be rapture then tribulation, or tribulation then rapture?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to lie to the people. I haven't studied this extensively, but my general belief as it sits right now, without any like evidence, because I haven't really thought about it a whole lot, is that it'll be rapture then tribulation. But I mean, I don't know. I could be convinced.
Okay, well,
by biblical evidence.
So let's tell you the two views. Let's tell you and the people just a quick reminder as we look at this, what pre-tribulationism is and what post-tribulationism is, and then we'll dive into this question. All right. So pre-tribulationism, according to one source that I got here, it says that it teaches that the rapture of the church, that is both people that are dead and people that are living, people who were believers, dead believers and living saints, believers, that will occur before the tribulation period. Now, the tribulation period is this 7-year period of judgment that's going to take place. And so the question is whether or not the church is going to be here during that or not. So, Luke, you would say, just without any evidence whatsoever, you would say that the church would be, that the rapture would happen prior to the tribulation. Other people believe that it's post-tribulation, which teaches that the rapture and the second coming are one single event that will occur at the end of the tribulation period. So when Jesus returns, that's also going to initiate the rapture. And then when at that moment, you're going to have, after the tribulation period, the people of God, living and dead, saints, everybody are going to be raptured and taken into heaven. And then you see Christ return and then go on from there. Now, people that believe in post-tribulationism believe that the church will be on earth during the tribulation and they'll experience the events that are going on during that period. And then they will also be, the church will be here to continue to share the gospel and continue to do all that kind of stuff. But the church will be protected. Now let's go back to the verse. It says in verse 10, you have kept my command to endure. I'll also keep you from the hour of testing. So post-tribulationists believe that this is saying that while the church is here during the tribulation, that the church will be protected from a standpoint of the judgment that's taking part within the world. That's how that view would be interpreted by post-tribulation people. Pre-tribulation people would look at this and say, I'll keep you from the hour of testing means that I'm going to take you out beforehand. Like I'm going to pull you away beforehand. So let's now go back to what this verse specifically means. I told you there's a lot here, Luke. So most people think that this is the Great Tribulation, that this will be a time for those that live on earth, that the unbelievers will be judged, the wrath of God will be poured out during this time, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think this verse, while it did have obviously in its context some meaning to the people at the Church of Philadelphia in which it's being addressed to here in this particular context, that it would for us serve as what's going to take place in the end. I personally go, and usually I don't like to tell you all this kind of stuff, but I will tell you my view here. I believe that the church will be here during the tribulation period. And the reason why I say that is that God will protect the church during that, but it still gives people an opportunity to hear the gospel. But there's also some debate on that, on whether or not people will be saved or not during that time, during that hour of testing that we're talking about here. Some people argue that people would be able to come to salvation during the tribulation time because they're able to see the things go on and have an opportunity through God's grace to respond to it and then be entered into the kingdom of God, just like we are now when we hear the gospel. Some people argue that the church will be continuing to share the gospel to those people, but they're not going to be receptive to it anyway. So we're going to continue to share it with them, but they're not going to be there. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, but I think most people that this verse bring all that together. Most people relate it to the tribulation that's coming. Whether you believe in post-tribulation, if you believe that the church is going to be raptured up after the tribulation period, or whether you believe that's going to happen before, there's biblical views that support both of that. So it's one of those things that are just kind of left open to your personal convictions and where you land on that. So again, it wouldn't be revelation if we didn't have different views and could kind of take your pick on which way you wanted to go. So, but it is an interesting verse, and it is one of those that point to kind of this idea, and kind of one of the first ones that we see on, these views kind of coming together, which is why we covered them in the first segment in Revelation, the opening message that we did. If for those of you that haven't seen it yet, we kind of cover these views to kind of paint that, because how you determine where you kind of fall in those views is going to be determined how you look at verses like this. So yeah, so there's that. That's kind of my best one. So just to kind of read from another resource here, it says that that this particular verse, it makes it very, very difficult to interpret it, because it's the most obvious meaning. It says is that he promises to protect believers from the wrath that's going to happen, and so that's a post-tribulation viewpoint, and so some people would argue that that if you argue on the post-tribulation side with this verse, you would say that the church has always had persecution and has always experienced tribulation and affliction in certain parts. So why would they not experience here at the end as well? Which is kind of one of the reasons why I take that view, because the church has always withstood through that and been protected through that. So, but yeah. So to sum it up, it basically, we've got a reference here to the end of the world, the Great Tribulation, and either way, God's people are going to be protected through it. So whether that's through a rapture at the beginning of it, and we're all called to be with God before it happens, all the crazy stuff goes down, the judgment and wrath to unbelievers, or if that means that the church is protected during that time, and then we persevere through that and then go on to be with God after that point. It's really tough with the book of Revelation, though, because as we've talked about this, there's so many different views. I mean, there's even some of you that would look at what I just laid out as far as the views and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot more into those views. It's not just whether you're pre-tribulation or post-tribulation. There's a lot of other layers that are within that. We're talking about one particular layer here, and we don't have enough time to go through all of those different various points. We'll uncover that as we go through the book of Revelation. You'll see some of that, and I'll present it from both sides, because I don't want y'all to just fall into line with something just because I do. I want you to, especially views like this, I want you to think for yourself and come to a conclusion for your own, and then engage in those conversations. Because to be honest, there's some of these where I'm still kind of like, I see it this way, that makes sense. I see it this way, it makes sense. And I'm kind of like on the fence between the two. So it's just to kind of keep that in mind, to keep an open mind in Revelation. But, we always want to make sure that when we're looking at the book and we're looking at these hard passages, apocalyptic writing, that we're really trying to understand it first. And how would the people that John was originally writing it to, how would they have interpreted it? And then once we land there, then we can figure out how does that then relate to us as the global church as a whole, because these were written specifically to those churches. And we do know that during that time, they were facing a great persecution and tribulation as well. So for them, it could have been seen as this hour trial that comes upon them, that it could have been viewed as that moment of what they were going through then. But then as we know it through the grand scale of the overall church, and this is where the way God works is amazing, that it relates to us in a sense of what are we looking to at the end? How are these things going to play out? So very interesting stuff, to say the least.
I agree. Indeed. Somebody did say indeed. Well,
so there you go.
I don't have any other questions.
I do. It's Thanksgiving, people.
True, so it is. Yeah. If comment what you're grateful for in the comment section below. I asked people to comment on the last video I was on, and nobody did. So comment what you're thankful for.
It makes me wonder how many people watch these things. We enjoy doing them. We enjoy engaging in conversations. I enjoy confusing everybody, because I feel like that's what I do when I talk. I hope that some of this stuff makes sense. You said it did, so we'll go with it. But I don't know, like, people just watch, comment, like
the video, smash like button.
It's
right there, right in front of you.
But hey, man, let us know, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? Let's engage in a conversation about the conversation underneath the conversation. That is the comment section. Just saying.
Now I'm confused.
Okay, well, there's that. But hey, man, I think that's all we got. But I do want to thank Luke. I totally threw this on him today when we were recording this and say, hey, man, let's jump on the podcast and let's do one because we haven't done one in a while. It's been a crazy time. And so we're going to try to get back in our normal routine of generate and then a podcast that follows that and continue talking about Revelation and continue engaging y'all in conversation. So, Luke, thank you. I know I just kind of overstepped and took the host role right there for a second, but I'm going to kick it back to you to conclude it. But I wanted to thank you for coming up with some of these good questions. And I hope and pray, really do, I hope and pray that we answered them well. I don't know if we did, but, that
I would say
stab.
I would say you did a very good job answering my question. And now that I'm the host, I get to say thank you, Pastor Andrew, for having me on the Epic B3 Students podcast.
That's right.
It is always a pleasure to be on here.
Yes.
And no B3, no equip this week, no generate this week. The week of this being posted, obviously.
Thanksgiving week. Thanksgiving week.
I will see you guys whenever I see you guys again.
Absolutely.
And with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Smash that subscribe button, punch the like button, like the video again. Make sure it's liked, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when the next podcast is released. Watch every single video. Comment what you're doing comment what you're thankful for or what you're doing for Thanksgiving or both. That'd be pretty cool. And with that being said, I love all of you guys, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.